They tend to hide the money where they cheated the investors.
They did it right, in
Yeah.
the right way, but they just did the wrong stuff. I mean, what they did was illegal.
The authorities are already doing their due diligence to kind of like completely cut everything and clean everything. Why does it take a rate notice for this other crackdown to happen? Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. My name is Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Hazwin Hassan. In the latest crackdown on a long-running investment scam and Ponzi scheme, police have seized and frozen over 338 million ringgit worth of assets linked to Mobility Beyond Imagination, or MBI. The scheme, which ran from 2012 to 2018, is believed to have defrauded more than 11 million people, many from a neighbouring country.
Yes, and on April 11th, a cross-border operation codenamed Op Northern Star led to the arrest of 8 suspects, including 8 Tan Sri and 4 Datoks, 2 of them being lawyers. Now, MBI's reach extended as far as New Zealand. Inspector General of Police Tan Sri Razaruddin Hussein says the Anti-Money Laundering Unit has now frozen and seized a total of 3.17 billion ringgit in assets and accounts. Now, the latest arrests followed an Interpol raid notice issued on March 20th.
MBI, founded in 2009 by Teddy Teo Wui Huat in Penang, was marketed as a members-only investment and loyalty program, promising sky-high returns. In reality, it was all a fraud, a pyramid scheme disguised as a legitimate business. Teo operated through a web of companies, including M-Face International and MBI Marketing, which together collected 1.6 billion ringgit between 2012 and 2018. Now dubbed Jho Low 2.0, Teo was arrested in Thailand and extradited to China last year. Police believe billions more in hidden assets could still be uncovered.
Yes, with billions still uncovered for and investors reeling from one of the largest scams in recent memory, how can the public better protect themselves from falling into similar traps? Now, to help us unpack this and understand the red flags, the regulatory gaps, and what investors should look out for, here we have today on set Fund Manager Neoh Jia Man from Tradeview Capital. Welcome, Jia Man, to the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Jia Man. Now, of course, you're here today not necessarily to talk about the nitty-gritty of the case of MBI and the crackdown, the Northern Star, but more on understanding the warning signs. So, to kick off, what are some of the classic red flags that investors should look out for to understand that they are actually going into a Ponzi scheme-like environment?
The first red flag that any investor should look out for is definitely the promise of a high guaranteed return. Preferably something that's above 10%. We have to understand that in Malaysia, the risk-free rate, which is based on our Malaysia 10-year government bond, is only 3.7%. And even for public equities, where the returns are inconsistent from year to year, the long-term annualized return is only around 10 to 12%. So if any scheme that can promise you a return that's above 10 to 12% consistently, it means that there is something that's not right, because it's a question on how they can sustainably deliver such kind of return to the investors. And it's likely that it might not be a legitimate scheme in the first place.
Right. But in the case of MBI, right, and when we talk about too good to be true sort of profits, MBI actually offered this to members only. It's a members only sort of like investment. They branded it as like loyalty program, right? So even then, they still get duped. So they in a way they already know MBI's track record, but in this context, they are still duped. So how can they better protect themselves then?
Actually, investors are still attracted by the sort of promised return of close to 60% per year. Basically, those investors in MBI scheme will get their coins and the membership points, which will undergo multiple split per year, which brings an annualized return of around 60%. That's the first reason why investors are attracted to them in the first place. Even though most of these points, around 45% of them, you cannot cash them out directly into cash, and you can only use them to purchase products offered by MBI in their scheme of things such as their M Mall in Penang. So it's in the end, what investors are attracted to are still the promise of high return.
So they don't even look at the transparency of the business.
Okay, that's a very good question. Basically, MBI, they boast to have a lot of business spending holiday resorts in Bali, in Danok, and even some malls and hotels in Penang. So this gives confidence to investors that it might be a legitimate business that can sustainably deliver such a return over the long run.
Right. I mean, we keep hearing about MBI. Obviously, is not the first of its kind. We can backtrack Ponzi schemes all the way back to the early 1900s when Charles Ponzi, the guy himself, created this, right? So of course, people who invest in these sort of programs, I think you have to give them some credibility that they are well informed. But what is it that drives people to still, fall for these sort of too good to be true promises in the case of MBI?
Yes.
Apart from sky high returns.
Yes,
right?
definitely. Because I think what makes MBI stands out from other scams is that they have a lot of physical assets such as malls, hotels, property projects, and even durian orchards that are
tangible.
So investors are sort of like given confidence because of that. Unlike other schemes, some of them are just like some non-physical or virtual coins. So this is what set up the scheme to be different from others, which is why I believe the scheme can run for more than 5 years compared to other scams that just collapse within some even less than 1 year.
Well, what's the average period a scam is able to sustain itself?
Actually, this varies. Some scams collapse within as short as 3 months. So these MBI schemes is actually quite impressive on its own.
Now, given the scale of how MBI operated its Ponzi scheme, 5 to 6 years, that's quite an impressive feat, as you mentioned earlier. How do you think they managed to keep authorities of their backs for so long? Would you say it was a lack of enforcement there?
Definitely. I think the scheme is actually quite obvious to even the public. But I believe the authorities might not have enough resources to undertake any enforcement, given that they might need time to collect those evidence, and MBI might have been able to hide those informations well compared to other schemes. And I believe some of these enforcement agencies might also face the issue of lack of fundings, which is why I believe the recent hike in regulatory fees by Securities Commission Malaysia is actually a good thing. Hopefully they'll have more resources to crack down on this kind of illegitimate schemes going forward.
And that just gives you an idea of how big their operations were. If they managed to pull the sort of resources that they did to keep authorities off their backs, then it shows you, if the authorities can't keep up with that, just how big this was, right?
Definitely. There are some things that I think I shouldn't mention.
And let's keep it that way, I think.
Right. But when we talk about due diligence, right, can investors at least cross-check their funds that they've invested, not necessarily, recycled through new deposits?
Okay. One thing that MBI has differentiate itself is investors can always log in and check their accounts online, which shows all the balance in that they have with the scheme. So it's something that a lot of others investment scams do not have, because they do not invest in the technology aspect of the operations. But for investors, we have to understand that legitimate schemes under Securities Commission that are regulated by Securities Commissions, all the funds that they invest with the firms or the scheme are held by a third-party independent trustees. These are the requirements. So it means that those funds cannot be misused by the investment manager for other purposes other than the stated or the mandated investment purpose.
Sorry, can you reiterate by that? Third-party
independent trustee.
Trustee, I see.
Yeah. So the money is not held by the companies operating the investment scheme itself, but rather it's safeguarded by an independent trustee.
So these trustees would have specific certifications and licenses to operate their services. And
Yes, they are regulated by Securities Commission
Securities Commission
as well.
itself. Okay.
So
okay.
this is very basic level of protection afforded to investors who are investing in companies that are licensed by Securities Commission. Be it not only fund management companies, but also those equity crowdfunding and also peer-to-peer lending platforms.
Crowdfunding is also part of it. I see.
Yeah, it's also regulated by Securities Commission, and the funds are also handled by third-party trustees.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In the context of whether or not it being risky to invest in schemes that rely heavily on referral bonuses and recruitment incentives, what are your thoughts on this?
Definitely. Okay, we have to understand that, for example, for fund management firms, the margin that the company make on investments is actually quite thin. Usually, the sales charge, upfront sales charge is only 5%, and the management fee is only around 2% per annum.
Right.
So if the company can't afford to pay more than such quantum as a rewards or referral bonus, it means that the company will not be making any money on those investments that they receive. So it's unlikely that any legitimate scheme will offer such a referral bonus that's more than 5 to 7%.
Now, as with Ponzi schemes, or typically with these sort of pyramid schemes, as what MBI allegedly is, these scammers, these people who run these schemes, they know that they can only hold it off to a certain point before the whole thing collapses. There's no way they can keep getting the downline, and perhaps you can explain how these pyramid schemes work, right, in detail. But I suppose a lot of people who are, are very well informed about it. So they know that at some point it will collapse. What is it that they have to do, these people who run these schemes, to hold it off as long as possible? And in the case of MBI, as you mentioned previously, it was quite impressive that they managed to hold it for that long. So what is it that these people normally do to make sure they can keep it running?
I'm sure they have probably, I'm not too sure, not just one entity that they're running, probably but as you mentioned, okay, they have physical, tangible
presence. Is it
presence.
multiple portfolios when they manage these funds, or?
No, actually they will try to hold out as long as possible until the withdrawals exceed the new investments. That's when they know that it's time to
exit
or collapse the scheme. And most of them, during the course of the operations, they will try to hide the funds in assets overseas or in some other local assets that's undetectable by the authorities, so that...
Such as undetectable by authorities?
Okay, they'll definitely do a lot of money laundering exercise to sort of whitewash those funds, and some of them might even go into local listed companies, equities, or all those assets that you have seen being seized by police recently, like the durian orchards, properties, all that are examples of assets. They tend to hide the money where they cheated the investors from. Yeah.
Okay.
Is it possible now, with what's happened on such a large scale, with more billions potentially to be uncovered here, that the funds from MBI, now their accounts have been seized, but they have already been the funds from MBI have already been sourced from, say, other syndicates running. Are we potentially looking at a multiple, collapse disaster? And what is this going to do to the stock market? Is public confidence going to be eroded in this way?
Definitely, that's something that we are quite wary about. This is because some of these syndicates on the market, which we should not name, it seems that they are also implicated in recent cases, which means that some of the funds where they use for the operations in supporting and manipulating the share prices are actually sourced from this MBI scheme. And with those funds being frozen, there's a likelihood that the share price of those counters under the syndicate might not be sustained at current level, which might lead to a collapse in the share price of all these related companies. And I believe this will definitely erode the confidence of retail investors. This is because most of the institutional investors like us, we are aware of these counters, and we usually would not invest in them. But the same cannot be said for retailers. And I'm afraid this might lead to a loss of confidence in the local market, which will eventually cause perhaps our Bursa Malaysia's performance will languish even further.
This is just one particular
Sure.
case, right?
How many do you think are going to be affected? What sort of
To the
scale
extent of it,
are we
I
talking about
suppose.
here?
The counters that are linked to these syndicates number in at least 20 to 30 stocks, at least.
Right.
Yeah, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so how can, I mean, we're talking about now, the aftermath of it all and the potential effects, right?
Mhm.
But how can actually investors report suspicious activities or schemes without fear and retaliation?
Usually, reporting to the authorities usually does not help them in recovering
Right.
their funds.
Yeah.
Immediately, you're
yeah,
talking about it. I
But
see.
it will help the authorities to track down on those schemes earlier, so it will help to prevent more victims from being involved in those kind of schemes. So, unfortunately for existing victims, that's the only thing they can do to sort of secure or get back part of their funds,
Right.
potentially. Yeah.
In this case, right, you're talking about the loopholes when it comes to having to report, having to audit. So, in what areas can we bump up in terms of our, safety measures here? What can security commissions do better instead of having to have the report later and then, tackle it when things are done, the deed is done in that sense?
Okay. Actually, Securities Commission Malaysia has actually set out a very useful platform for any investor to check on the legitimacy of the investment scheme. It's called SC Investment Checker. So investors just need to go online, go to the website, and then input the name of the company or the products that they are researching, and to get a sense of whether these products are offered by legitimate entities or not. And secondly, for investors, because some of these schemes, they might masquerade or they might imitate the name of other licensed entity.
Right.
So when investors transfer their fund, it's essential that they make sure that the name of the bank account holder matches the name of the licensed entity.
It's
that
as
they're
simple as
investing in.
that.
Yes.
But in the case of MBI, though, they were set up, legally. They're a registered company. They have, MBI itself it's got its holdings, it's got its other companies under it. So they were set up legally. They did it right in the right way, but they just did the wrong stuff. I mean, what they did was illegal. So how do people then make this distinction where the company might be legit, but what they're doing is wrong?
Yes, in MBI case, investors will not be able to tell that it's a fake entity, since the name of the firm will match the name of the account holder.
Exactly.
But MBI has never been licensed by Securities Commissions to carry out the activities of fund management or managing the investors' money. So whenever they input the name of MBI into those like SC portal, like SC Investment Tracker, they will see that it's not a licensed entity, which is one of the first things they could have done in the first place.
So you think that the many investors who were scammed, they skipped this step?
Definitely. I think they're unfortunately blinded by greed and the promise of getting maybe 60% return per year.
What is the threshold? I mean, earlier you said 10 to 12%, right? And if they promise it on a consistent basis, that should bring some alarm bells. So would you say like 12% is the threshold, and if they promise any higher, that's where you should back away?
Okay. Actually, SC does regulate heavily on which investment or capital market products can carry the term guaranteed or even capital protected. In fact, those kind of capital market product has to be guaranteed by a guarantor, which is a licensed bank in Malaysia. So in the market, those kind of products are quite rare, and usually the promised return is below 10%. So 10 to 12% is something that is already quite generous in the first place.
Okay.
I mean, okay, so we're talking about MBI, we're talking about in terms of returns and everything. But of course, the man behind it, Tradeview, how much do you, or at least the people in your field, know about this guy? What are some of the talks, especially when the first initial crackdown happened, especially towards his company, happened in 2017, if I'm not mistaken? What were the talks behind the scene at the time?
Actually, he is not well known. He is not well known in my industries, but he is well known in the locals as the person who ran the Island Red Cafe scam before. So I think a lot of the local Penang guys, they will know that this scheme is never legit in the first place, given his track record of having scammed investors out of their money.
So that track record that he has from what
Island
was it again?
Red Cafe.
Island Red Cafe. So that could have been the first warning sign for investors before they then fell for the MBI scheme, right?
Yeah. Right. But again, investors are blinded by greed and also the appearance that the company has multiple businesses that span different fields. But I do not rule out the possibility that some of the investors actually know that it's a scam that will collapse eventually. It's just that because they have so many tangible assets, it gives them confidence that this money game can continue for a much longer period of time.
Do you think it's likely that since it managed to last as long as it did, so the people at the top of the pyramid scheme, right, eventually they became complicit? And so these people then started running the scheme because, as you said,
there's no way out.
There's no way out. We might as well reap the profits while we still can.
The intentions might not necessarily be to scam people or be part of the syndication.
So would you think this compounded the issue and eventually? Good thing that it got to the MBI being there's a crackdown on MBI and it collapsing in 2017. But do you think it compounded, the losses that investors endured?
Definitely, I do think that some of the early participants in the scheme actually do not lose any of the capital. In fact, they might have made more than what they have put into the scheme. So. Definitely, all of this come at the expense of the late participants, especially the mainland Chinese investors. This is because we all know that there's this firewall Chinese wall being erected by the Chinese government. So this which prevented the mainland Chinese investors from accessing up-to-date information, which is why some of them are only made aware of the collapse of the scheme 1 year after the scheme has been raided by Bank Negara Malaysia in 2017.
Matching with other schemes out there, maybe some have yet to be taken down.
Yeah.
Do you think the way we approach investment must be different so that it doesn't necessarily become like a ghost sort of investment opportunity? Do you think we should move away from having to get Chinese investments into Malaysia?
I do not think that's really relevant to this scam, but for local investors, actually there are already a lot of legitimate schemes in the market. For example, even the EPF, actually the government guaranteed like 2.5% return per year, and the return typically has exceeded this target rate by quite a huge quantum each year. So I think investors just need to have the mentality of not being too greedy when it comes to their investment options or choices. Yeah.
When it comes to being wise about your investments, right? I was told by someone who's a fund manager that you should go for regular intervals and invest in the same amounts in these. So let's say over a year, if you're going to invest 12,000 ringgit over a year, you should be investing a month, 1,000 a month, and keep to those regular intervals. So something, would this be the rule of thumb for
formula,
investors?
I suppose, yeah.
Okay, for investors who do not have the time to monitor the market, this is definitely an efficient way because it's to help to lower down the average cost of investment because it's called dollar cost averaging method. I do think that it's also a way to keep be disciplined in terms of putting away part of their monthly savings into investments. So I think this is indeed a recommended way to grow one's investment portfolio rather than getting involved in all this scheme.
The Penang Trade Center is essentially a mall, right? But basically that's like the effect or the things that you can see because of bad investments, right? I'm just trying to see the bigger picture here. how can we move away from having to believe in such projects or such opportunities are able to benefit the community, but eventually it actually benefits that investment company itself or the person behind it running that Ponzi scheme?
The problem is actually most of the locals are aware because the prices of merchandise in the Penang Times Square is actually marked up by maybe 30 to 70%, and hence usually locals do not shop there. But because these schemes relies heavily on mainland Chinese investors or other foreign countries that are not aware of perhaps the normal product price in Malaysia, that's why they are sort of taken in by the schemes despite it being such a ridiculously expensive amounts to spend their money in.
Right. I mean, also because it's interesting you said, why foreign investors were more attracted because they probably are not so familiar what's happening here. And since, Teddy Teoh's MBI has been linked to being a front for the Macau scams as well, it is interesting to see the parallels because for instance, with the Macau scams, you would have the call centers set up, say, in Malaysia, but then they will target victims overseas.
Yeah.
So is the thinking the same there? Because they might think, oh, okay, those overseas will not understand how things go here in this country, so it's easier to target.
Yeah, definitely. When ones are looking at investing, it's best to invest where you have a homegrown advantage because you understand the local conditions better than others. This is why a lot of these investment scams, they tend to target investors overseas because they might not be familiar with the local market conditions or even whether the scheme is legitimate or not. It's actually there's a lot of obvious signs for locals to even be made aware of it. That's why when the schemes collapsed back in 2017, locals are the ones who withdrew first, and the foreign Chinese investors are the one left holding the bag.
Left holding the bag, meaning up until probably a couple of years later, whether or not a Ponzi scheme is still able to thrive even after a crackdown. In the situation that happened, you would think that the authorities are already doing their due diligence to kind of like completely cut everything and clean everything. Why does it take a red notice for this other crackdown to happen?
Based on reported informations, the reason why all these remnants of the funds left over from the scheme are only being unraveled now is because Teddy Teoh was only extradited to China last year, 2024. They have gained a lot of valuable information on how the whole ecosystem works.
I suppose more amped up, cross-border sort of like attention needs to be given between the relevant authorities.
What do you think if someone or investor might think that they've received profits from a scheme like this, illegitimate scheme, a Ponzi scheme like this? What can they do to, number one, keep them safe, themselves safe, and moving forwards, how can they make sure that they alert the authorities in time enough?
Actually, for an individual, the only thing that we can do is to make police report. Unfortunately, because a lot of the victims or even potential victims, they know that it will not help them in recovering their funds, which is why they don't even bother making a police report in the first place. But definitely, that's the best thing one can do to help prevent other victims from falling into the same trap. So reporting to the police is the first thing that one should do.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this particular episode. Once again, I'd like to bring the attention back to the set and thank our guest today, Neoh Jia Man, for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. Thank you so much, Neoh Jia Man, or Jia Man in this case.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yes.
Thanks so much for your insights, especially in terms of understanding technicalities behind how Ponzi scheme works, where should we invest our money, and what are some of the red flags that we need to identify before putting our money into areas that we don't necessarily understand.
Right. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this.
You're most welcome. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hazrin, as well, for being here
Thank
today.
you for having me.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And to our audience back at home, if you do love this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. If you like this particular episode, don't forget to also comment, like, and engage with us on social media. We are on X, Facebook, Instagram, as well as Threads and TikTok. My name is Amalina Kamal, and I'll see you next week.